Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our session, Deep Dive into Visual Studio Express. Is that volume too loud? Is that okay? Visual Studio Express 11 for designing Metro-style apps using XAML. And that takes a long time to say that title, but that's OK. I'm Joanna Mason, and
I'm Unni Ravindranathan.
We're both program managers on the Expression Blend team. And we're going to be talking about using Visual Studio Express to build out the XAML of your Metro-style app. So let's get started. So as I said, we're going to go over the XAML experience. And the way we're going to do that is with the Memories application. Some of you might have seen the Memories application in some other sessions. And we're going to take a closer look at it and talk a little bit about the design goals of the app. You know, what are they trying to accomplish? We're also going to talk a little bit about how that application is uniquely Windows 8. Then we're going to build out a couple of those user flows using Visual Studio Express and use the interactive designer. And I think by the end of this hour, we'll show you how using Visual Studio Express and the XAML presentation framework allows you to efficiently create your Metro-style UI in a way that's really intuitive for users, that's visually compelling, and hopefully delights your users as well. So let's talk about the design goals briefly. The Memories application is really about a way for you to capture and share life's moments in a very pleasing, interactive format that seamlessly integrates with all of the devices used to capture those memories. From a design perspective, it was really important that the content take center stage. The content was first and foremost, but yet that the experience felt personal and kind of fun. It also, we wanted it to have a minimal and a very clean visual style, which fits in very well with the Metro-style UI. Design patterns and guidelines. So as we're going through the whole session, a couple times I'll remind you a little bit about, hopefully you've gone to some of the other sessions that talk about the design guidelines. And I wanted to show you just a couple links. So I've had a couple people ask me, hey, where do I get more information on some of this stuff? So in the deck, which will be available online, there's some links. And there's some really good resources out there for you to be able to, what are the design guidelines? How can I apply them to my user experience? So I just wanted to show the website where you can get access to this information. This checklist, I think, is actually really pretty cool because you can just walk through, hey, what are all the elements? What do I want to do to my application to really make it take advantage of all the capabilities of Windows 8? So you should use those resources to really understand how you can take best advantage of the platform. All right, so let's get started by taking a look at the completed app. And this application has already been pre-installed on your tablet. So right away, you can see it's got the albums have the content laid out. It's first and foremost. As you scroll through, you can get a look at all your different content. And each album has a slightly different layout. So what the user can do is they can kind of select that. Let's take a look at the charms bar. And in there, we've got the option to go into search. And search is integrated in this application, so you can simply find the specific memory you're looking for. This is also integrated with the, all the commands of the app are exposed through the app bar. And you can look at that just by bringing up the app bar. And in this case, we're just using a regular laptop. So even though Windows 8 is designed to be touch first, of course, it also works seamlessly with a laptop. So we're using a keyboard and mouse just fine to interact with this application. So in the app bar, there's a command called New Album. And when you go into that, you get a choice. So I'm creating my content, I'm adding my pictures, and I can choose a really nice, pleasing layout that my content will populate. But as a user, I don't have to do all the work of making it look good. I can have a really nice looking photo album without tweaking too much in the app itself. So over the next hour, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to build out the main header area of the application. We're going to be do the main header area. We'll be building out a custom album template that the users can select to put their content in. We'll be hooking up search and adding commands to an app bar. So let's go back to the slides. So I want to talk a little bit about the XAML presentation framework and, why would you want to use XAML for your application? So for those of you, how many here have used XAML before? Has done WPF, Silverlight, yay! So this is really great news, right? Because now you can use all the skills that you've developed over the years, all the knowledge that you have, and even some of the assets that you have, and apply those directly to this new platform, this Windows 8 Metro-style applications. Now, if you're new to XAML, for the few of you out there who haven't, it has all of the capabilities, the flexibility that you would expect from a presentation platform. It has a declarative programming model. It has separation of application logic. It has an expressive set of controls, so it has advanced layout capabilities, vector drawing. The other things that are really great about XAML is it goes a little bit further in the sense that it makes it really easy for you to have a consistent look and feel of your app by taking advantage of styles and templates and resources, and we'll go into details on that a little bit more. Also, I think that the data binding capabilities in XAML are just really first class, and a lot of people who use XAML, that's just one of the things that's so easy to hook into a data model. Really easy, you can data bind between two different properties in your application. And finally, with XAML, as with any UI language that you'd want to have, you really want it to be extensible. Say you have an idea, you have a vision of what your application is going to be like, and it's totally different than anything else. You want to have a novel, unique vision. And with the extensible custom user controls that you can create and the styling that you can create, you can get exactly the look that you want to have for your application. So let's talk a little bit about, so we've talked about the presentation framework, and there's also a language choice. So the really great news about the designer in Visual Studio is that it's the exact same designer whether you're building a C# app, a VB app, or a C++ app. It's the same thing. So previously, so people who've been using Visual Studio for a while say, I can use Visual Studio, but now the C++ developer has the exact same WYSIWYG designer capabilities. So that's all available today, and we're also really excited. I think some of you have probably already picked up on this from some of the other sessions and the fact that Uni and I work on the Expression Blend team. How many people have used Expression Blend? So the other really exciting thing that we're happy to share with you is that we've actually merged the teams that were doing the XAML Designer in Visual Studio and Expression Blend and the code base. And what that means is that now the designer in Visual Studio has been replaced with core authoring components that are now shared between Expression Blend and Visual Studio. So that's pretty cool for a variety of reasons. But let's just talk a little bit about, let's talk about Visual Studio 2010 and let's talk about Blend 4. So they both have, the ability to add objects and edit properties and a lot of the same, what I call core authoring, object creation, layout, property editing. And the problem was in Visual Studio 2010 and Blend 4, you could do almost the same thing, but the UI was different. And sometimes even the rendering or the parsing of your files was different. So you'd see something in Blend, and then you'd go to Visual Studio, and you're like, I have no idea why this is any different. So one of the benefits of us doing this shared model is that we'll have a consistent method of, it'll be the same parser and renderer across both products. For the Visual Studio user, you also get the benefit of a few Blend features that maybe you didn't have access to in Visual Studio, and we'll go over a few of those today. When you think about the users of Blend and Visual Studio, today we're talking about, we've really focused on the Visual Studio Designer, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, so I'll be focusing on that a little bit. We really think about Visual Studio as the place to do code-centric tasks. That's your center of gravity. That's what you're thinking about. But there's that set of things that you want to do. Some things are just easier to do visually, and you want to have a designer to do it. So we're providing that in Visual Studio. But each product is really going to stay focused on its target user and its workflows. So design-centric tasks, Blend is a great place to be. Code-centric tasks, Visual Studio is a great place to be. But in both cases, there's things that you'll want to use a designer for. All right. So let's just start diving right into it. Let's start building out a few of the application elements that we talked about. So let's have a look at this new project dialog. So instead of starting from scratch, for this demo, we decided to use a template that is provided installed. So here you can see the new project dialog, and we used the grid application as a starting project. And so just to sort of keep talking about that language choice, no matter what your language choice, whether you're choosing VB, C# or C++, you get the same set of project templates. They have the same look and feel. You can use them in the same way, and they're all available right here. So we used the grid application, and we've also added a simple data model to this application that pulls images from the My Pictures library. And we added a few styles and resources that we're going to use in the process of the demo. So we'll go back to the application. Let's go to the running application for. So the area that we're going to build out is that header. So the logo that says memories, your life book, and we'll build out that text block that says gallery of memories. So we'll go into Visual Studio and we'll start building out those elements. But before we do, we want to do a little configuration of our workspace. As you can see, we have a WYSIWYG designer that shows you a rendered view of the currently open file. And we also have your XAML text editor that gives you a text view of the XAML. We also had a solution explorer. So as you can see on the right-hand side, there's the property inspector. And when you load Visual Studio for the first time, that actually won't be displayed. So you'll want to grab that from the view menu. There's another window that we want, and that's the document outline. So we'll go to the view and choose document outline. And this gives you a list of all the objects in your currently open file. We'll just dock that. Actually, yeah, the toolbox tab was docked on the left-hand side. We're just going to bring that out. So now we have all the views that we want. And for those of you who use Blend, you might notice already, you can see some similarities. The document outline looks surprisingly familiar to the object tree in Blend. So for example, you have some features like show and hide of objects, which is really cool because you can now turn off objects that are in your way, and it doesn't mess with your runtime settings. So you show and hide, that's a design time only visibility toggle, which wasn't in Visual Studio 2010, which is a really nice feature for being able to get at visually the things that you want to edit. OK, good. So we've got all of our items. Let's start getting the look and feel of our app going. As you can see, it has a black background, and we want to add an image as our background. So we have a PNG file, and we're going to go ahead and select, I think it's the main window object. And in the properties window, you can see that we could change that. It's set to a solid fill, and we could change it to red or whatever color we want, kind of play around. But in this case, we want to use an image. And so we want to use a tile brush. So all you have to do is select the tile brush tab in the property inspector, and then you can simply set the source to, as you look in that dropdown, that's listing all of the files that have already been added to my project. So once we select, let's select background image, and there it is. So that looks OK, but that image actually has some transparent pixels in it. And so it's blending with the object that's behind it, which in this case is the layout root object. So we'll select layout root, and then again, you can play with that background color, and you can see the images blending with the pixels below it. And we want to use a gray color that the designer of this application gave us. So you can play with the values, or you can simply type in the hex value if you know exactly what you want. So that looks pretty good. I think that we'll start to play around with, there's that arrow that's a back button, and we don't really want that. We're going to replace that with the logo. So let's zoom in. And the zoom in is really great because all you have to do is you just point your cursor. I want to go here, and you use your mouse wheel, and it's going to zoom in to the point where your cursor is. So that gets you to the right zoom level so that you can really focus in on what you're trying to edit. If you want to then pan at that particular zoom level, you just press the space bar and click on the design surface and pan around. So it makes it really easy just to zoom around, get it exactly what you want to edit, and edit it right on the design surface. So the next thing, once you get the view that you want, the next thing that you need to do is select something. And so selection for us is something that we spend a lot of time making sure we get it right because you do it all the time. So let me show you a few different ways that you can select things. So the most obvious is this is a visual tool. Let's select something visually. So you can just pick that button by clicking on it. That's great. Not that surprising. But let's say you know the name of the object. You actually don't know where it is on the screen, but you know the name of the object. So then you can just select it by name in the document outline. All right, that's great. But But let's say, this happens all the time. You've got things like 4 or 5 elements stacked on top of each other. And, you want something that's sort of in this position, but you don't really remember the name, and you just know it's like kind of here. So you can press the Control key and right-click, and you get a pop-up menu that lists all the objects that are below that cursor position. So it makes it really easy to get at things that might be obscured below and then edit it. And then once it's selected, by the way, you can move it around. I don't know if you've been in any design tools where you might select something and then you click again and it gets the thing on top and you're like, that's not what I wanted. So that feature is a really nice way to allow you to edit things. So there's one more selection technique that we're going to use. And that is, so when we right-clicked, it gave us a list of all the things under the mouse in the stacking order that they're in. If you just want to traverse through the artboard, you can press the Alt key and click, click, click. And as you're doing that, you can see it's going up the hierarchy. So in this case, when we select the button and we want the grid that's its parent, you just click twice and you get the grid. So let's talk a little bit about the grid control, because there's some really nice features. We're going to spend a little bit of time on the grid. And actually, for those of you who've been looking at some of the features in Blend and the HTML designer, the grid UI might look a little familiar, because it's actually pretty much the same. But what I want to talk about is the different ways that you can manipulate objects and the way that that grid can size itself based on what the column and row settings are. So if you hover over the top of that column, you get a little pop-up that says, hey, here, there's something here. And when you click on it, you get a menu that sort of gives you a bunch of options for the grid. And in this case, notice that the grid column is auto-sized. And what that means is that it's sized to the content of the elements in that column. So let's say we grabbed that button. And
there's some difficulties here.
Oh, we'll grab it in a second. I'll talk a little bit about, one of the reasons that, are we good to go?
I think, just give me a second.
So one of the things that's, preview release.
There we go.
We'll get there. Do you want to restart it?
I think Windows is hung at the moment. Give it a second. Just give us a second.
So we'll talk about auto-size containers. I think that one of the really great features. Do you want to just restart it?
Restart Windows?
I don't know.
Let's give it. Oh, there you go. I
it's
think
back.
One second.
Woohoo!
But in general, I think it's preview software. So give us a second.
Is it coming back?
No, it's not.
Oh,
yes,
sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, actually, let's do that. So does anybody have any question that we can?
Let me just quickly.
Well, Uni is the best person to actually answer that question. And he was asking about Prism.
Yes.
And if it's going to be migrated to the Metro.
You'd have to ask the patterns and practices team.
Yeah.
And, there is no specific plans that we are doing to help or hurt that scenario. So I think there's some problem with. Just give it a second.
You can, of course, always implement your application using the MVVM pattern. As Uni said, we don't really do anything special for that either way. Yeah. So
sorry about that. I think the display driver crashed on this laptop, so I'm just doing a quick reboot.
Yeah, that's fine.
If people had questions, we could just answer them. Yes, please.
So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about so what we focused on in this release is the core authoring scenarios that I mentioned. So it's object creation, the property editing, and the layout editor. So those are the sort of the core scenarios that we're focused on for this release. We're always interested in feedback of what people feel like they would also like to have access to in Visual Studio. So that's something that we want to have a conversation with users and sort of see where they want to go. We don't want to add a lot of stuff that isn't necessary for the sort of workflow that you want in Visual Studio.
Jonah, do you want to log in?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just going to go back right in. I hope this works this time.
Let's see. So what else can I talk about for a little while?
We're almost there. Just one quick second.
Yeah. So for traversing the trees, you go up and down. That when you press Alt and click, that will always go up, and then it'll recycle. No, it only goes one way. Only up. We're very optimistic on this team. No. Although, yeah. Although, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. One of the things that we're working on is, to make all of the UI keyboard accessible. So as a part of a requirement of shipping with Visual Studio, we'll be adding a lot of sort of enhancements to the focus model and keyboard navigation. So things like that will be a little bit easier than they would have been in Blend.
As some of the implementation has been rolled in native code, is there any difference between the old XAML and the new XAML?
So the question is whether or not there's any difference between the old XAML and the new XAML. And the answer is yes, there is some differences. It's sort of, you can think of it as it's most similar to Silverlight, but it's got some other additional XAML things added for Metro style, and not all of Silverlight has been, so it's neither a subset or a superset, but it's very similar. So I think the important takeaway there is that you are able to use all the knowledge that you have and apply that to XAML, that the concepts are the same, maybe some of the controls and the properties and that kind of thing is different, but you should be able to, reuse all the knowledge that you've developed over the years.
So the problem of creating so many behaviors in XAML, in the old XAML, you found some behaviors, and in the new XAML, maybe you have some additional support to solve the problem. Behaviors, the one you created with the Blend SDK, for example.
So the question is, so for
If you want to map an event with a command, you have to create a behavior.
right. So the question is, in Expression Blend, shipped with an SDK, which implemented a construct called behaviors, which allowed you to add interactivity to your elements, and it also did some other things where you could do some hookup of different elements in your scene. For what we're talking about for Metro Style, we have no behaviors support for to talk about today.
Okay, Joanna, we're just about ready to get started. Our sincere apologies. Let's go.
Okay. All right, great. So let's go ahead and move
right
our
there.
back button out of the column.
Let me just zoom in so people can see what's
Yeah.
going on. All right, here we go.
All right.
Hopefully nothing will go wrong.
All right. So when he moved that out, what happened is the entire column collapsed down because there was nothing left to hold it open. So one of the features that Blend did not have, but the Visual Studio 2010 designer had, was the ability to pop things into a collapsed column. So if he grabs that and then drags it over to the column, you get a tooltip that says, hey, press tab to put it in this collapsed column. And then when he put it in, it just pops it back open. So it's really nice because if you had collapsed, you guys work with auto-size columns all the time in rows, and you have to go into the XAML and move it in, and this is just a lot easier to do. Doesn't mean you can't do it in XAML. It just means that we're doing it on the design surface. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and delete that. Let's get moving a little bit. We're going to add that image, the logo, up to the top, and in the toolbox you get the list of all your controls. So we'll grab an image object and just simply draw it out, and as he's drawing it out, notice you get the adorners that you would expect, interactive feedback of the size. You could see the little margin snapping, all the sort of goodness that you would expect to be able to precisely place your objects on your design surface. Now what we want to do is put an image in that object. So that's the property, so we'll go to the property view and select the source of small logo. And there it is, but that's squished. We don't want that. So we're going to go change the stretch property to none because we want it to render at its native size, but then of course it's being clipped because the object is too small. So similar to the auto-sized grid column, we're going to make this image width and height auto. And in the property inspector, you have these handy little buttons that make it easy to go ahead and just change width and height to auto, and then it looks much better. So that looks pretty good, and now we want to change that text that says memories. We want it to say gallery of memories. And when you click on it on the design surface and we look at the text property in the property inspector, you can see that it's got a little line around it that's saying, hey, this is bound to something. You can't edit it. And we're like, okay, well, what is that bound to? Well, there's a neat feature that you can just click on that little square to the right, which is called the Advanced Options menu, and you can go to value definition. Woo! So then you can say, oh, okay, now I know what that is, and I still don't want it. So let's go back to the property, and then we'll choose another handy little feature of the Advanced Options menu, which is called Reset, which just basically says unset that property value. So we'll do that, and then we'll just type in some new text that we want to use, which is gallery of memories. And then once we have that text in, it doesn't quite look right. It doesn't match the styling of our application. And we happen to have a style in our application, and it's a resource, and we can apply that, again, from the Advanced Options menu with the local resource property. Oh, I know what I forgot. I forgot to find the style property. Okay, so the style property, I don't know if you guys, anybody who uses a property inspector, there's a lot of properties on objects, and sometimes they can be hard to find. So I want to show you a few of the tips and tricks that you can use to navigate your way through the property inspector, depending on what you sort of know of your project. So right now we're in category view. There's a arrange by menu, and in there's a couple choices. So the category view is convenient because it sort of groups things that are related together, so all the layout properties are together and all the text properties are together. But in this case, I just want to find the style property. So we could choose name, and what that does is it gives you a list of all the properties in alphabetical order by their name. Very easy. So this is a great view. Let's say you're trying to explore, hey, what else is in here? You just want a flat list. Nice way to look at it. There's another view, which is also really useful, which is the source. And this one basically only lists the properties that are set. So let's say your application is doing... So let's say your application is not looking right, and you're like, oh my gosh, why is this not working, and why does this look weird? You can sort of look at that, and then it just sort of filters that out for you. Now, I personally like the category view, and so we'll go back to that. And there's one more feature of the property inspector that it makes it really easy to find things in that search. So for the expert out there, for the person who knows what they want, they know what it's called, and they just want to find it really quickly, search is a great way to do it. So he's just going to type in style, and then it filters it to the properties that contain that string. And then we can choose the Advanced Options menu, the local resource, and choose the header text style. Okay, so it's a little clipped, and it's not quite in the right position, but that's okay, because we're just going to move it around using the adorners and position it to exactly the place that we want. Notice he can pan and zoom and get easy access to all the objects that he has while he's doing it. So, okay, so I think, keep our fingers crossed, I think we're ready to run it. Okay, so while that's loading up, I just want to recap a little bit, kind of the highlights of, besides the fact that the machine had to be restarted, so we'll just ignore that. But basically, the designer is a really great place to do things that are tailored, visually. That it's just easy to do visually. So here we go. We have the Memories app. We have our text. It all looks good, and we have this nice black area, and that's what we're going to be filling out next. So let's, exactly. So we're going to be filling out that area in the next step of the demo. So let's take a quick look back at the finished. Is it still up? Or?
No, I'll have to run it again, but no problem. Nothing else could go wrong.
So what we're going to do in the next section is that we're going to build out a custom album template that's going to display our content in a nice, beautiful design that we want to use. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to build out a user control, which defines the layout, the structure of how we want to display each album. So in this case, you can kind of look at it and you say, okay, well, it looks like, maybe a grid, And then I can sort of, quarter it up and add some images to it, and I can do a design kind of like that. So that's what we'll build out next. So let's go back into Visual Studio and have a look. So we're going to use user control to lay out the items, but what we want to do is we want to put that in the grid view control. So let's take a look at the XAML of the grid view control. So in here, you can see that it has an item template. So for those of you who know XAML, this is no big news, but just to provide a little context for people who aren't familiar with what that is, the item template says, hey, how do you want to draw out all the items since this grid view is a collection of items? And it's referencing a thing called album template. So we'll go to album template, and album template is simply an empty user control.
Oops, sorry about that. Pressed the wrong button. Let me just kill this guy. All right.
And that's really as simple as that. That's how the connection is made between album template and the grid view. So now we're going to build out our custom design in album template. So let's have a look at the image that says what we're going to try to build. I think that's on the desktop.
On the desktop, right here. Oops, let me just minimize this guy, right here.
So that's just a simple picture of what we're going to build out next. So we'll go ahead and go back into Visual Studio. So the first thing that we want to do is we didn't actually create a resource for our background color. So let's just make this a little bit gray, just so that we can sort of see a little bit what we're trying to do. Okay, so let's add a grid to the root object of this scene. And then we're going to use the adorners. So notice as he draws out a grid into the design surface. So what we want is we want this grid to be the same size of its parent container. And this next command that we're going to show you is like your best friend in the designer. I use it all the time. And that is auto size. So you right click on the grid and choose auto size and fill. And that just basically says, hey, clear out the properties so that it fills the container. And then when you stretch, by the way, if that window resizes, the grid will resize with the container. So that looks good. Now we're going to add a couple rows and columns. And we can do this real quick, just with the designer. Notice that as he's going to hover over, you get the adorner tells you where you click, where it's going to be positioned. So we'll throw a couple columns in there, throw a couple rows. I'm not going to worry too much about positioning yet because we'll fix that up later. And let's add a couple border object, maybe to the top left. And so you can just draw it out. We're not going to worry about its sizing or positioning just yet. But we want another border. And another easy way to just say, hey, just give me what I've got, make a duplicate, is to press the Alt key and drag out another border. And notice as you do that, you get these really great snapping adorners that allow you really easily to align, hey, I just want these things right aligned with that other thing. So there's lots of different snapping and alignment features that you can have. So now we have 4. But I remember from the picture that top right had a grid in it. So I don't really want a grid. I want a grid there, not a border. So we're going to use another feature. If we right-click on that border, there's Group Into. So we're going to choose Group Into Grid. So that just basically takes that border and wraps it in a grid. So you can tell in the document outline sort of what happened there. Okay, great. So now let's quarter up that grid we just added to give that structure that we need for our content. And we'll go ahead and draw out one more border. And I want to point out something. So notice when he selected the border, it went into the border tool, and you could draw out a border. And then it immediately went back to the pointer tool. And that's super useful when what you want to do is make an object and then edit it. But let's say you want to make more than one border, or you want to draw out like a whole bunch of buttons at once. And if it kept going back to the pointer tool, you'd be like, wow, that's really annoying. I really don't want you to do that. So what we've added is a feature that if you press and hold the Control key when you click on a tool in the toolbox, and then go over to the designer, it's going to stay in a sticky mode. So that border is going to be, the border tool is in a sticky mode, so you can draw out multiple objects. And then when you decide that you want to go back to the pointer tool, you can just select it. Okay, so we have a loose layout of our structure, and I want everything to be auto-sized. So let's talk a few more selection features. So one of the things you can do is let's just pick one of the borders in the smaller border, and if you select the Select All command once, you get all the siblings of the current selection. But that's not good enough, right? I want to go bigger. So we're going to press Control A again, and we're going to get all the parents of all these things selected and its siblings. Really easy way to select quickly a bunch of things that you're interested in editing. Now I have a multiple selection, and now I can apply edits to that selection set. So he's going to right-click and choose auto size, and that does that to all the selected objects. Okay, so that looks good, but the next thing we want to do is we want to add a nice little border to all our borders. But notice the property inspector is, let's bring the property inspector up. What it's doing, actually, can you do the select all again?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to show you that what happens is the designer is saying, okay, what's the current selection set? And then what it does is it filters the properties that are displayed to only display the properties that are common to the current types of objects that are selected. And since we want to edit only borders, we'll just go ahead and use the control key in the document outline to unselect the things that aren't borders. Oh, but you know, yeah. So but before we do, so we're going to do that again in a little bit. But before we do that, we're going to style one of the borders. So let's select one of the borders. Mm-hmm. And let's add a little border thickness to that so that we can see we want to have a little border around it. So we'll make a border thickness. Now, as you can see in the property inspector, I believe, that the border thickness is actually 4 values. And you could go through and type 8, 8, 8, 8, but that's kind of annoying. So what you really want to do is type one number and have it applied to all. And so there's a little trick that we'll show you here, and that is the custom expression command in the advanced options menu. You type a single value, and it gets applied to all 4 values. So that looks all right. And now we're going to change that border color to something, maybe let's make it white so we can see it really well. And let's make that, you know, both of these items we're going to apply to all the borders. So we're going to make both of them resources. So we'll start with a border brush and go convert to new resource. And this is a great way for you to say, hey, I want that. I want to use it again later. So we're going to call this panel border brush. And so then we can save that off. And then, you know, resources aren't just for brushes. They're for any kind of value. So we'll also make a resource out of our border thickness property. We'll call that panel border thickness. And then what we'll do is he's going to go ahead and do all that selection magic to select only the border objects. And then what we can do, kind of like we did the auto size, we can also use the property inspector to apply the resource that we just created to all the selected objects. So we'll go ahead and do that for the border thickness, local resource. And notice that the local resource menu shows you only the resources that are appropriate for the type of property that you have selected. So if you have lots of resources in your project, they're not always going to all show up. And then also we'll apply the border brush, which you did. So that was super quick and easy to get that look that we wanted. Now, this is also a really cool thing. So what Uni just did is he can edit the brush after it's applied to all the objects. So as he's editing that brush color, it's updating on every single object that it's applied to. So great use of resources for getting a consistent look and feel on your application. All right, let's go ahead and run our application and just sort of see what it looks like right now. Take a quick breather. So it's just, in just a few minutes, we're able to get this basic structure, create resources, use the different selection mechanisms and multiple selection and editing on multiple objects at once to get to the look that we want. Now, this looks pretty good, but I think let's just tweak it a little bit so it looks a little more even. So let's go back into our app. And once you stop debugging, so this is just a really great thing is that you can go ahead and select that grid and then you can just edit those rows and columns. So let's do, just kind of make it a little bit more even. Maybe grab the row.
Good? Okay.
Down there.
How about that?
And so notice because everything's auto-sized, everything's sort of moving together and flowing together. So you don't have to manipulate all the objects individually. Okay, so that looks good.
How about move the column on the right to the left?
That's a great idea. So one of the cool features that you have in the designer is I decided the designer said that it should be quartered on that side, but I want it on the left. So you can hover up to the grid column.
Anyone taking bets that Windows won't hang when I bring up this guy?
So what he's going to choose is move column, and boom, it moves the column and everything in it. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to add some images, the big moment. This whole section that we just talked about, we showed you really how these are all operations that are really nicely tailored to be done visually. In the next section, I'm going to show you some, we'll do a little XAML editing for when we know exactly what we want. But there's also times where you don't know the XAML syntax. And we try to provide some features that allow you to generate the right syntax if you're new to the platform or you're trying to figure things out. So what we're going to do is we'll add an image object to one of our borders, because that's what we're going to display our images from our My Pictures library. And he drew it out there, but let's say, and that added it as a child to the border automatically, where you draw it in. But let's say we don't want it in that border. I just want to move it to a different border. So you can just grab that, move it on the artboard, and similar to, you get this little tooltip that says press Alt to reparent. So you just can reparent it right on the design surface, and it goes exactly where you want. Now, you could also reparent in the document outline. So let's drag that image and move it to a different border. And it just moves it back. So you can change the parenting and your positioning, and all that stuff sort of updates automatically. I think in Visual Studio 2010, you could not reparent anywhere except for copying and paste, moving things around in the XAML editor. So I think this is just something that it's a lot easier to do using the document outline or the design surface. Okay, so let's go ahead and auto-size that guy up, and maybe get rid of any extra margins or anything that might that we don't want. And then let's go ahead and go to the source property. Actually, before we do that, on the stretch property, let's set that to fill the stretch. Yeah, because we just want the image to take up the full space. And we want to bind the source to our data model. So we're going to use the data binding dialog. Now, this dialog is a work in progress, so I don't want you to focus on it too much at the moment. So he's just going to choose the default data context and the custom expression and type in the name in our data model, which is source 1. And then when he hits OK, let's take a look at the XAML that's generated. So the important thing to take away here is that the data binding dialog gives you a way to set up data binding and generate the XAML automatically for you without having to know all the syntax. So here you can see it added it for us. Now, so we've added an image object and we've data bound it. But let's say I didn't want to use a designer for any of that. I just want to type in some XAML. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing, but for another border. So as he goes in there, you'll notice that the text editor does exactly what you'd expect. It has full IntelliSense. It's really easy for you to type in. When you know exactly what you want, you know your syntax, you want to have that precise control of your markup, you can do that right there. So the designer is really tailored so that you can work how you want to, when you want to. When you want to work visually, you can work visually. And when you want to use a text editor, you can use a text editor. All right, so I think we've got that all set up. Pretty close. Oh, stretch, yes, we want stretch fill. And what do you think? Are we ready to run it?
Before we run it, I want to show one quick feature, which is the color eyedropper, which is again something that we brought over from Blend. So let's go ahead and what we want to do here is we basically want to pick up this color. So there are two ways we could do this. The first thing we could do is, of course, we know our beloved color editor. So we could just go here, set some color here. But we really want to actually pick up the exact pixel value that the designer specified. So what we could do is we could actually use this tool that we have called the color eyedropper. So no matter, bring up your picture wherever you want. It could be on the web, wherever it is. You use the color eyedropper and move it around, and it picks up the color that you want, right? So there we go. So that's the color.
And actually, just for kicks, then why don't you show them that it works for gradients too? I mean, while we're here.
Sure. What could go wrong?
Why not? No, but yeah, so just grab it from you can actually, so if you choose a gradient brush and then the color eyedropper becomes a gradient eyedropper, and it'll pick so grab something that actually has,
and you can see it has multiple. It's a very subtle gradient, but it did pick it up. Like you can see there's a stop here, so if you do something more drastic, like let's say try to pick this guy up, you can see it's more of a drastic gradient, but that's it.
So again, it makes it really quick and easy to get that quick look that you want of somewhere. Oh. Okay, great. So as that's loading, we looked at a lot more features about the grid, and it's a super powerful container, and we have really nice designer support for it to allow you to really manipulate those values in the way that you want. Okay, so we're starting to look much better, right? We've got our basic structure, we have our albums laid out. Now we want to make this look a little bit more Windows 8. So the next thing that we'll do is go ahead and add search. we can look at the finished application. So in this application, search is integrated in the charms bar. And just to be different, we're going to add a little icon that they can click on to launch search. So that's going to be what we'll do next. So we'll do that back in our main page. So we'll go back over there. And we spent a lot of time getting that image and that text just right. So we're going to lock it down. So we're going to use a feature in the document outline that is lock. So if you just sort of make that a little bit bigger, I think, so you can see it. Yeah, there you go. Go ahead and lock it. And so you can just click that, and that means, don't let me edit this thing. When I'm on the design surface, you can't accidentally grab it and move it around. It makes it a really nice way to say, I'm done with that. Don't let me mess it up. So we've locked those down. Then we're going to go over and add a little search icon to the top right of our window. So we can do that, again, familiar toolbox, grab an image, draw it out, and then we'll set some of the properties. So we'll set the source property to our search image, and we don't want that to stretch, so we'll do stretch none. And we'll set up some margins so that it's not too far right, not too close to the top, all of those good things. So we have our image, and now we want to hook this up to an event, so when the user clicks on it, that it instantiates a search pane. So we'll go ahead and choose the Events tab in the property window, and this gives you, like the properties, a list of all the events for the current selected object. So in this case, we want pointer released, and when you double-click on an event, it's going to generate a default event handler for you. Now, if you're using MVVM, you might not want to use this method. You might want to do a different method. But if you are just kind of playing around and you just want to hook up a quick event handler, it's perfectly acceptable to do it this way too. So it's your choice. And if you just kind of want to it gives you, the default event arguments and all that stuff. We just have a quick snippet that we're going to insert to instantiate the search pane. And actually, one thing after he does that I wanted to also show you is that, let's go ahead and open the package manifest. So we've added this search capability, but what we didn't show you is that in order to have search work in your app, you really need to turn it on in the package manifest. So as you can see here in our declarations page, we already have search added. So you would have had to done that before, and then search will work. And while we're here, let's take a look at the oh, is it already gone?
Oh, go for it.
While we're here, let's look at the capabilities page. And as you can see, the picture library is selected because this is pulling images off of our picture library. So you have to declare that you're going to be using that access. So these are already set up as the starting project for us. OK, so we have our search hooked up. Let's go ahead and run it, make sure it works. So we've, again, been able to use a feature of the designer, which I call for the explorer. We were able to just add a quick event handler, scan through the events, and I don't know the arguments. It's really easy for me to create that. And we hooked up our search instance pretty quickly. If you're in your own app, you might actually want to do a more custom search page that does the search results and you lay it out. In this case, we just wanted to show you a quick hookup. So now we have search. OK. The next Windows 8 element that we're going to hook up is the app bar. So let's take a look at what that looks like in the final application. So when we bring up the app bar, you can see it's got some nice icons. They're circular. They use a vector icon shape, and they're all nicely spaced and all that good stuff. So we're going to go ahead and add a couple commands to our app bar in our application. So we'll go back, and let's just see what the default experience gives us. So we'll go into our app, and we'll just add the built-in, the app bar as it comes in out of box. Just sort of draw it in there. As things kind of reload, the designer, sometimes it takes a minute to refresh. So there it's back.
Just zoom out a little bit so people can see what's going on.
Yeah.
There we go.
Great. And I think, yeah. So, this is not something that we can take credit for. We didn't do it, but I love the new search in the toolbox, Visual Studio. Yay. So for those of you who not, so we can just easily search there, just like the property inspector, grab the app bar, add it to our application. And then we're going to set that so that it fills, it's auto-sized. But we also want it to always be aligned to the bottom because we're going to have this app bar be coming up from, swiping up from the bottom. And we always want it to be 88 pixels. And I'll tell you why. in a moment. So let's give it a run and see what the default experience gives us. And so it was very easy for us to add that app bar. And the reason that we chose 88 pixels is because that's what the Windows Metro Style design guidelines say it should be. So it'd be great if everybody, again, just as a reference to the design guidelines. So there it is. It's the right height. And it's using that default content, which is just a text block. So that doesn't look very Metro style. So we're going to make a change to that. And for our application, we want to have an app bar that's consistent across multiple pages. So we're going to make use of that user control concept again. And we're going to create a user control that'll be our own special memories app bar. And then we can use that in multiple screens and different app bars. So the way that we create a user control is just to right-click on the project and choose Add New Item. And then we're going to pick a user control. And we'll just call that, Memories App Bar. And press OK. And then that will open that file. And it's just a blank user control. And that's sort of right now just using this default height. And you can one of the features that you have in the designer is we have these design time settings. So we saw the design time settings for visibility and that kind of a thing. But you also have design time settings for auto-sized containers, in this case, the user control. So when he drags that around, what it's actually setting is the design time width and height. Now, one thing I want to mention, too, is that the rendered view of XAML is always in sync with the XAML text editor. So as you select and as you edit objects, they're sort of updating at the same time. So we're going to go ahead and set the design height to 88, just so that it's the right size as we're designing up our app. All right, so we're going to put our buttons, and we'll put our buttons in a stack panel, because we want them to be stacked next to each other. So we'll draw out a stack panel, and we'll make it fill the contents of the user control. And then we'll add a button to it. Just draw it out. And then let's just draw another button, because we're just going to add 2 for the purposes of the demo. And we don't want the layout properties in that. We just want everything default. And in the XAML editor, it's really easy just to grab the properties and just delete them all. So I think that.
Oh, sorry.
So go ahead and just delete out the layout properties so that we get the default sizing. So once that happens, the next thing that you might have noticed is that, well, these are stacked vertically, and we want it to be a horizontal orientation on our stack panel. And so you just grab the stack panel and then go over to the property view and change the orientation to horizontal. And then we want that whole stack panel to be aligned right, because remember from the session, it either should be on the left or the right so that it's easy to grab. So we'll choose right. Now, the buttons are in the right place, and they're kind of metro-y, but they're not that circular. So we actually have a style that we're going to apply to these buttons. So let's take a look at that style in app.xaml. So it's in app.xaml, which means that we can utilize this style from different XAML files across the project. And a style is simply a set of properties that is applied to a specific type. In this case, the style doesn't really do a whole lot except for the fact that it has a content presenter where it adds the circular style, and then the content is always centered within that circle. So that's pretty much, is that pretty much all it does? OK, so let's go back to our buttons. We'll select them both, and we'll apply that style to our buttons. So he selected them in the object tree. Really easy to do. Going to maybe search to find the style, or yeah, looks good. And then our local resource, and then there's our style. OK, so now they're circular. Great. We're happy about that. But we want an image instead of the text that says button. Mm-hmm. So we can
just got to go and give it some margin as well, so we can control the spacing.
Right. Actually, so that's a good point, right? Because this doesn't match the design guidelines. Because the design guidelines say that I should have 60 pixels in between the buttons on the app bar. So he can just set the right margin of the buttons to 60 pixels, and then they're always going to be in the right place. Much better. So let's go ahead and draw an image in the.
Let me just zoom in so people can see what we're doing.
I think you'll find as you're using the designer, I'm constantly zooming and panning because I just want to make sure I get it very precise. So he draws out the image, and then we're gonna add an image, but we haven't put one in our project yet for this button. So we're gonna go over to the Solution Explorer, and we'll just add a folder that we're gonna put our images in. So that's just right-click, new folder. And then once we have the folder that we want to use, give it a name, we're going to go ahead and grab some images that our designer created for us. So we'll use the add existing item, go find the images that we want to use, and simply add them to the project. Now once they're in the project, they'll show up in the source dropdown so that we can apply it to the button, or to the image. So we'll select the image, choose the source, and select it.
Let's see, new album, looks good.
Okay, and so then, let's just go ahead and grab that image and maybe right-click, choose copy, and then let's paste it as the content into our second button as well. And then we can just update the source to be a different image.
Let's see, grid.png. Looks good.
Okay, so now we have two. It's looking much better, but it's still in our user control. So now we want to build our project, and then we'll go back to the main page application where we had our app bar, and we'll find that our memories app bar is now in our toolbox. So if we scroll up to the top of the toolbox, we'll get a list of the new controls. So once the user control is built, it's essentially a new type of control that we can add to our application. So there it is. Just automatically shows up in your toolbox. And then you can just add it.
Oops, I missed that one.
And undo is fully supported. So if you happen to make a mistake, you can undo, which is great.
We don't need that.
But he didn't have to undo. That was just a little bit of a Zoom situation. But it's always good to know that undo will work. So that's looking a lot better. And I believe we're just going to run it.
Yep.
So in just a few minutes, we already add that app bar. We made use of a user control that we can reuse in multiple pages on our application. We made it match the Metro style by applying a style to our buttons. And now when we bring it up, we have the right look. So I think that we've met our obligations. We built out the header. We built the album template. We hooked up search, and we added the app bar command. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we highlighted here. One of the things that's really important to us is that balance between working visually using the designer and just being able to edit the XAML directly. So we do put a lot of emphasis on making sure that XAML editing experience is really robust. So just want to make sure that people understand that sometimes visually is better and sometimes editing XAML is better. And so things that are easier to do visually is things like fine-tuning layout and experimenting with your property settings. And when you made those changes to the document hierarchy, that's just a lot easier to do in the designer. But things like getting rid of very specific properties, or you already know the syntax and it's simpler for you to type it in quickly using IntelliSense than using a dialog to generate it, that's a place where you might want to edit the XAML. The design time environment that we provide in terms of the visibility and the locking and the design time width and height really makes it easy for you to edit exactly what you want to edit without worrying about messing up the runtime settings of your application. And finally, we were able to have a nice consistent look and feel with our application by using resources for brushes and thickness properties and a variety of other things. Okay, so it wouldn't be a preview without a bug fix. So as you know, sometimes after the bits go out the door, you find a situation. And so that's what's happened here. And so I want to encourage everyone to go ahead and click the link once the deck is available to download a wonderful patch that we have for the designer on the Connect site. And what this patch fixes is, let me give you a little background. So sometimes when you are using the designer, it won't let go. The mouse release doesn't get fired. So you're moving things and then it sort of sticks, and it can be very frustrating to use the designer with this bug fix, with this bug. So please do download it. And actually, I'm not going to explain anymore. That's pretty good. Okay. So then there's a bunch of other sessions that people can attend to get more background on XAML. And talks and documentation. So the links are all there. And of course, we always like feedback. Our email addresses are there. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And we can take I'm a little over, but I think we can stay a little extra if people want to ask questions. And I think that's it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.